Welcome to Leaders in Conversation, where we explore more human ways to work with leaders that are challenging the conventional wisdom. Although we're no longer in the industrial age, how we think about the nature of work is often still stuck in that paradigm. Being human at work is complex and challenging, but we believe it's worth the effort because it is the path to more productive, engaged, and motivated people. Welcome. I am your co-host, Ken Blackwell, and this is my co-host, Amanda Cookson. Welcome again to Leaders in Conversation. Today's guest is Alex Smith. He is going to be speaking about the uncomfortable truth about success. Alex is the founder of Basic Arts and is a strategist who helps businesses carve out positions in their markets with no competition. So welcome today, Alex, our guest. Hopefully you're here and can come back on. Great.
Hello.
Welcome. And Amanda, why don't you ask folks in chat to contribute here?
Yeah, great. So welcome everybody. If you can put in chat where you're from and what your observations are about success. So where you're from and your observations about success.
Fantastic. So speaking of success, Alex, let's ask you the very first question, which is, based on our title, what is the uncomfortable truth about success?
Well, hi guys. First of all, thanks a lot for having me here. It should be quite fun, I hope. And that question, obviously there's a lot of different bits and pieces that we can go into on that. But I guess if I was going to boil it down to the kind of one takeaway that I really want to talk about today, and I want to stress that this is something which you can apply on a personal level or to a business or to any kind of unit, if you like, which is trying to sort of flourish in some way, is that obviously the thing that we've all been told about how we can be anything we want to be, and or like, you know, you can any business can in the same way succeed in the way it wants to succeed. That I think very strongly is a myth, and it's obviously a self-evident myth when we all think about it. But the flip side is that the good news is that although I don't think you can actually succeed at anything you want to succeed at, I believe that anybody can be extremely successful and flourish greatly, no matter who they are and no matter what the situation. The catch is that you do not get to choose what it is that you succeed at. And actually, the knack to all of this is being able to put aside your own personal preferences and your own personal sort of desires for the path you want to take, and allow that path to be chosen for you and to fall in line behind it. So, I mean, that probably sounds quite abstract at this particular stage, but if I give you an analogy from my work that I do with businesses, you'll see what I'm talking about and how we can actually apply this to all sorts of different scenarios. So when I work with businesses, obviously my job is I'm giving them strategies, which means essentially I'm defining what their role in the market is and the path that they're going to take in order to kind of really get traction and be successful within that market. Now, whenever people found a business, they always begin with a hypothesis. They think, my idea is X. I think this is going to work because of my analysis of the situation. And if I execute this and I'm right, then I'm going to fly. Things are going to go well, and I'm going to succeed. And of course, what anybody who has ever started a business or even frankly been in quite a well-developed business knows is that initial hypothesis is always wrong. Okay. Mm-hmm. We some are more wrong than others, but we obviously have no ability to predict. I mean, and today we've all seen a good example of our inability to predict complex things. And the way that a business is going to travel in the market is a very unpredictable, complex process, which we cannot preordain. Instead, what happens is that you put that idea out there and it immediately starts taking on a life of its own. Now, if you're unlucky, you're not actually doing anything interesting at all, and it will sink. But if you're lucky, one way or another, you'll start to get traction. But what you'll find, what you invariably find, and what I found with every single company I've worked with, is that the way that the business gets traction is not necessarily the way that the founders intended to get traction. So in essence, they will be doing something accidental, which they didn't really mean to do, which is maybe a sort of byproduct of the core plan that they had. But that will be the thing that will be valued by the market. And that will be the thing which the business will start to move with. And of course, in those early days, you're going to do a lot of experimentation with a business. You're going to try lots of things. Some things are going to succeed. Some things are going to fail. And it's all going to be quite random. And you're just hoping that you take a few steps which allow you to start climbing. And by and by, you could stay in this experimental period, and lots and lots of companies do. You could stay in this experimental period for years. I have one client. It's a 25-year-old business with 100 million turnover, so they've done very well. But I can tell you, without naming who they are, that they have been basically winging it for the entirety of that existence, and they have more or less no idea what exactly it is that they offer as a business to the market. Of course, they understand in a very sort of general sense, like we make cars, we make shoes, that kind of thing. But they don't actually understand what it is that they in particular are bringing and that really works. So this is exactly the same process that I think all companies go through. And what a company needs to do if it really wants to accelerate and become something more than just this sort of scrappy, hardworking, sort of experimental entity, and to become the sort of thing which really has true presence and in its market, and which people really kind of look up to. And we all know, the stereotypical businesses that people talk about with regards to that, your Patagonias, Red Bulls, your Teslas, all the cliches, right? What they have to do is the founder has to essentially understand what this thing is that they've created, get on board with it, even if it's something which is quite counter to their original strategic intention, and then essentially start doing that thing on purpose. And I think in a bit of your promotional material, you use my favorite quote by far, the Dolly Parton quote, which is find out who you are and then do it on purpose. That is it. That is the whole story in a nutshell. But the important bit of that quote, which I think is very easy to miss when you just look at it in passing, is that she did not say, choose who you want to be and do it on purpose. She said, find out who you already are. And that is something which actually maybe you actually aren't even superficially that keen on. Maybe it wouldn't be your first choice. Maybe you wanted to play in the NBA. And as it is, you are actually, are going to be a far better librarian. I don't know. But the point is that you need to understand where you as a business or you as an individual have traction. And that is not something which you actually have control over. It's very determined by a whole range of complexities in your environment, in your context, in your time, in your own personal attributes, which come together to create something quite unpredictable. But if you find it, then things start to click and everything starts to flow. So that was a sort of bit of a rambling answer to the question, but I just sort of wanted to lay out some sort of groundwork, I guess, that we could build off.
It just makes me kind of think, what if you don't like where your business is organically going? What if you love doing this one thing and whenever you do it, it's crickets, and this thing that you hate then is where all the engagement is? How do you navigate that space between preference and what's kind of resonating in the marketplace?
Well, the first thing I'll say on that is that I think it's quite unlikely that on a personal or business level, you're really going to get traction in something that you hate. So I don't think that that particular outcome is likely. What I do think is quite likely are two things. Firstly, it's quite hard for our sort of hubris and our ego to maybe let go of things that we valued very highly. Most of the time we value things based on what we see other people do and what we admire, and we want to copy. Now, of course, especially in a business context, that's copying is a terrible idea because, that thing's already been done. But equally, you can sort of apply that to us on a personal level. But often, we are attracted to paths, not because they are our path, but because someone or something that we think is really great has gone that way, and we want to go in the same direction. So it takes quite a lot to abandon that, because obviously, we are creatures who build our entire kind of universes around copying. Then the second thing is that, which I think is important to note, is that obviously we all want to be kind of, we all want to achieve something that's aspirational and which is exciting. And obviously that was a crap example I used earlier on when I said NBA player versus librarian, because it made it sound like I was trying to compare something exciting with something boring.
Libraries are exciting.
Well, exactly, but maybe not to the aspirational NBA player, who knows? But the thing that I think is really interesting is this idea that what is aspirational, or to use a much more blunt word, what is cool, does not come down to what you are doing specifically. It doesn't come down to the content of what you're doing. It actually comes down to the sort of extremeness and fullness with which you embody that direction. So just to illustrate that point, if we were to, say, pick three very different characters, let's say we got Stephen Hawking, we got Mother Teresa, and we got Johnny Knoxville from Jackass, right? Now, I think we can all agree that all of these people follow very different paths and, fit into very different kind of niches in the universe. But one thing that we can say about all three of them, even though they're very different, is that number one, they are all very interesting, very aspirational people. They're all widely admired. None of them could be ever described as boring or dull. And the reason for that is that they are all very completely who they are. And I think we make the mistake of focusing too much on what we are or what something is, and wanting it to be something which we find to be superficially desirable or interesting, and not enough on the thing which actually really creates, well, success in a blunt way, but also very sort of charismatic people, very charismatic companies. And that is completeness of embodiment of whatever you are. It absolutely doesn't matter. Like if you were going back to the librarian thing, if you were sufficiently congruent and complete and aggressive, if you like, in your pursuit of that position, then you would be something incredible, because it's the degree that makes the result.
Well, and you made me think of a quote which maybe is like a Stephen Hawking quote. Some thinker said this, that, if you judge a fish by the standard of a monkey, it will always be judged a failure, right? And so what are the expectations that one has? And those expectations can be out of alignment with, where your skill set really lies. And this also seems to fly in the face of what a lot of business literature will tell you, and a lot of business schools will tell you about, what it really means to be, one of these exceptional business leaders, that it is through their grand ideas or force of will that they create these directions, not that they are being created by outside forces. And it seems almost a little bit, one could say fatalistic perhaps, that, well, if I can't drive this success myself, I'm going to be made by something else. I mean, you can speak a little bit to is this just a fatalist idea here? Or how do we navigate that?
I mean, I suppose that honestly, I think it kind of is, but I don't see it as being, but I don't really see that as necessarily being a a negative, because you're talking about accessing a result, whatever that is, a path, which is something far greater than you're able to come up with. You're talking about, you know, accessing the, if you want to look at it this way, you're talking about accessing the greater mind of the market, or the greater mind of culture, or the greater mind of nature, whatever the particular scenario is, in order to shape who you are. And to my way of thinking, that's better than using my own limited powers, right? I mean, you talked about the sort of business literature, and it's a funny one, because I sort of see there as being two sort of archetypes for business leaders, which I think are kind of exemplified by Steve Jobs and Mark Zuckerberg. Now, I don't actually know the realities of how these guys operate precisely, but broadly speaking, obviously Steve Jobs is seen as being the sort of the visionary, the man who creates the future, if you like. He has the vision, he makes it happen, it works, and it booms. How much that is exactly how it worked out for him, I'm not sure. But that is definitely the more desirable way to see ourselves. But it is also very counter to this idea. Whereas on the flip side, if you take Mark Zuckerberg, much less aspirational figure, typically, even though obviously he's still like a billionaire and all of that jazz. If you look at the history of the development of Facebook, you know, he did not have Facebook in mind. He didn't have Facebook in mind until the way that what it's sort of become, until years into its development. Obviously, his first concept, I believe, was a sort of hot or not site to rate, you know, people's relative attractiveness in his classmates in Harvard. And by, obviously, he observed the way that people reacted to it, and he responded, and he let the company shape itself. So he was not the leader of his business. He was actually the follower of his business. He was kind of like the servant to what it wanted, or what people wanted from it. And so this idea of actually, you know, being a follower, I think is extremely important. And again, you know, and it applies to in those other scenarios. You know, I mean, all of this stuff is, I like to think of it, if you want to think of like the root idea, and then if you take the root idea, you can apply it to lots of different things. The root idea you can think of as being natural evolution, right? So every single animal, let's say, except for human beings, who obviously are a sort of special case, every single animal has a kind of set nature, you know, a kind of, they operate on rails, you know, all wolves behave like wolves, all, you know, sea bass behave like sea bass. They have a set nature which makes them fit beautifully into the natural ecosystem. And that nature is not determined by them. That nature is determined by the needs of the system, right? It's determined by the needs of the context. And if the system changes, then the creature changes too. It adapts to the needs of the system. So in that regard, you know, they are constantly being shaped by this wider force. And systemically, this is exactly what is happening in any complex system. In any system where you have a wider context and then this thing within it, whether you are that thing, whether your business is that thing, whatever it might be, you know, it could be a novel in the novel market, you know, anything. And when you kind of like work out from those first principles, I think you start to see this pattern repeated all the time, this kind of pattern of like allowing yourself to be shaped by the circumstances rather than you being the one to shape the circumstances.
Interesting, because I think it sounds to me like there are, within your philosophy or the things you're describing, there are things that are almost at opposite ends or are quite paradoxical. Because on the one side of things, you've got, okay, so find out who you are and do that on purpose. So that feels like, to me, that's about looking inward. That's about connecting to the essence of my Amanda-ness and really rocking Amanda to the point where I'm a full embodiment of the kind of best and most fullest expression of me. And then there's the other side. So this is the bit that feels quite paradoxical, which is about how, as Amanda, I'm influenced by the system and the world in which I operate, and how that moves me, connects with me, disconnects with me, and therefore where I can fit or move within it. So I can either be resolute in being the best version of me, or I can flow like water into the space that's being created from the system.
So well, I'll tell you a sort of story about a friend of mine to illustrate what I mean by what I mean here, because essentially who you are as a person and the context which you're operating within they're indivisible, right? They are all grist to the mill here, and it's all important. Now, when I was in school, me and a friend of mine, when we were like 15 or something, we went to see the movie Collateral with Tom Cruise. I don't know if you've ever seen it. And he plays this sort of like colder than ice assassin. And, you know, he's got this sort of gray hair, this sort of silver fox kind of look, and wears these sharp suits. And, you know, he's sort of like super cool, right? That's what you're meant to think. And of course, we did think that. And so then for like an ill-fated, you know, couple of weeks, my friend really tried to sort of model his persona on what we'd seen in the movie, you know, the way that like a teenager does. But the thing is, there's no getting away from the fact that what works for Tom Cruise, you know, 38-year-old Tom Cruise in a movie in Los Angeles, does not work for a 15-year-old schoolboy in Ipswich, right? Like it doesn't fit, right? It doesn't fit. It's a square peg in a round hole. So, you know, it was his context is completely indivisible from his own desires and his own self. And if you pick something, and you are not this kind of like completely atomized thing, which is completely independent of the context that it's in. Because if I pick you up and I put you into a tribal village in the Amazon or something, and I say, right, you've got to live here forever, then the solution for you is going to change. You might argue that you haven't changed, but the context has changed. And so the way that you personally are going to fit into that context is going to be different to the way that you're going to fit into your London context or whatever it might be. So yeah, I would kind of encourage you to not see a sharp dividing line between the two things.
So then in terms of, let's think about congruent ideal leadership at the moment. So our context for all of us as leaders has shifted. So what's your kind of view about how that shift is then influencing the way that we should be as leaders?
I think there are a couple of angles to this. The first one is the one that I discussed already in a terms of leading the organization, and this idea of following and not trying to resolutely impose your vision. I do think that you can do that once you have ascertained. I mean, here I'm thinking in the context of, I realize that leadership is a very broad thing. I'm thinking in terms of leading an organization here, leading a business, that kind of thing. Once you've ascertained the nature of the business, then you can actually start to be more active. You can get in front, because you and the business are essentially in agreement over what the plan is, and you can then start really, really attacking it. But before then, you have to be more humble. You have to take a back seat, and you have to learn. You have to learn from experience and try different things out, and not hold on to any vision too tightly. So there's that side of it, that sort of organizational leadership. I would also say there is as well a sort of people leadership element to this as well, naturally. And it's something which, which I sort of like am less involved with in my day-to-day life, but I have a sort of perspective on it, and it's very similar to the thing that I think we've heard many times before about whether or not it's important to help people work on their weaknesses in your organization. Now, this is obviously very, very dependent on the specific case, but speaking in broad generalities, obviously I come down somewhat on the side of not only not particularly working on people's weaknesses too much, but actually sort of embracing them and taking the viewpoint that, you know, every weakness has a counterbalanced strength, and trying to nurture that. So in the same way, you want to try and sort of funnel your people for their benefit and for your own benefit as an organization. You want to funnel people into the places where, again, you have that contextual fit, even if that is obviously out of the business itself. You know, I'm not really a believer in a way in people being sort of extremely adaptable. I mean, I think that we can be very adaptable if we want to have mediocre performance. Then we're unbelievably adaptable. But when things are right, when the strategy, if you like, of the person is lined up with the context, then things should become easy. You know, it's you know, I don't know if you heard of to draw another sort of random business example to illustrate the same point. I don't know if you must have heard of Halo Top, the ice cream brand, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, I think in America they're now the bigger than Ben and Jerry's, unbelievably, and in the UK they're sort of upcoming. Now, they were around for quite a few years before they made their big break, and in exactly the right sort of fashion, their founders were basically very experimental during that time. You know, they were sort of like, didn't really know what they were doing, as no early stage founder does. And, you know, they were sort of trying the other things out. And obviously they had a sort of general concept of sort of low calorie ice cream, but they're not the first one of them. There are loads of them already. But they were sort of twisting it in different ways and trying it in different places. And then one day, I don't know exactly what it was that they did that made it click, but they did something to make it click. In other words, they made it find fit with the market. They made it find fit with the ecosystem, and more or less overnight, it exploded. And their founder, he has a quote, something along the lines of, he says, we had no idea what it was or what we were doing, but suddenly it just started growing in a way that really shocked us. And that to me, I always think is very interesting, because it demonstrates how easy things are when things are lined up, when the fit is correct. Again, you know, like Arnold Schwarzenegger, when he was a champion bodybuilder, like, it wasn't hard for him to be a champion bodybuilder. It was very, very easy, you know? A lot of people who have outstanding success in different fields, they're doing things which are very hard for a given person, but for them, it's not only easy, it maybe is almost irresistible. You know, he said something like, if he went more than 24 hours without, you know, going to the gym, you know, he would almost feel physically sick because he wanted to do it so much. Well, no wonder he managed to become, you know, no wonder he managed to become the world champion. So you are really looking for people to have that sense of ease in their job, that sense where their job is kind of a bit of a piece of piss. And so I don't subscribe to the fact that, you know, you should actually be sort of really sweating and hustling and working hard. If you're doing that, then what you're doing is you're pushing against the closed door. You know, you're not in the right position. And once you are in the right position, then you feel it, and it's just kind of a breeze, or at least it'll feel like a breeze.
Well, this kind of goes to, you know, in the world of development, you know, in people organizations, things that, say, Marcus Buckingham has talked about, you know, that fighting against the idea that it is possible to be strong in all things, right? That we go and we tackle weaknesses to build those up. And, you know, people have sort of natural strengths, and we build up all those weaknesses so they're strong all over. As somebody who was as a kid, was playing a lot of role play games and Dungeons and Dragons and things, one of the things you learned about creating a character was you had a limited number of points to put into either strength or dexterity or, endurance. You could be really strong, but that meant maybe you weren't going to have as much endurance, right? Or you could be really dexterous, but that was going to have another impact, or incredibly charismatic. You couldn't have all of those characteristics be high. And as a coach, I think I've seen that as well, where the expectation that someone can have a whole suite of strengths and no weaknesses is just, not going to be there. So
well,
yeah.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to ask because I'm just curious, like from your perspective, who on that sort of people in organizations point have a lot more experience than I do, and I'm extrapolating ideas from other fields into that field where, in all honesty, I'm being theoretical here. But do you think that these things ring true in your experience?
Well, yeah, I think there are some things and I think what you're talking a little bit about underneath all of this is sort of DNA. Right? That there are certain sort of innate characteristics, whether part of our upbringing, part of our biology, that tend to lead us to things that we can describe in terms of style, but also in terms of aptitude. There are some folks who have an easier time settling down and concentrating on, a very discrete task. Like for me, some of those that are really difficult, like sitting down and going through a bunch of numbers or doing some computer coding. Like that for me is incredibly difficult. Could I learn it? Could I do it? I could do it better than I do now. Would I ever be really great at it? No. But golly, I can get in front of a group, I can talk. And for me, that's easy. But for that person who is better at numbers, maybe that's a terror. Maybe that is something that is just beyond what they think they're capable of. So I think there is something of this, fit. And from the company perspective, Amanda was talking about the extremes there. It seems like another weird extreme is you need to have a certain amount of ego to start something, right? To put yourself out there, to be I've got an idea and I think this can work. And then subjugate your ego to go, and now allow the market to tell me what this is going to be. And I'm going to take my cues from the market and I'll be adaptable, and then have that ego come online again once that alignment is there to then start to drive things forward. And that seems, from a personal standpoint, that seems like a hard thing to do. I see lots of folks who are really driven, whose egos are really engaged. And then I see people whose egos can take a back seat. And the flip between those seems a bit more difficult. So kind of throwing all that out there for you to chew on. I'm not sure what you have in terms of a response to any and all of that.
I like the point about the sort of the flipping back and forth between the ego thing, which is why I think that it's imagine my kind of response to various things you said there, including the thing about the sort of the DNA and the sort of natural aptitudes, if you like. People are, I think, obviously that's sort of very unfashionable thing, and it sounds very negative, and it sounds like the opposite of sort of can do, and it doesn't sound like the sort of thing which you want to tell your kids, like, oh, you want to be a the ultimate stereotypical example, like I said before. Oh, you want to be a basketball player? Well, you're 4'2". It's just not going to happen. Like, we all know it's true, but again, it's very sort of like, this doesn't sound like the right thing to say, which is why I again reiterate that point, that any particular position can be exciting and charismatic, and we need to kind of, like, I think, decouple our thinking from, again, that sense of aspiring to things that other people have done, which we cannot do, and recognizing that we can be that aspirational thing in our own niche. So I do think that, on the one hand, it's this kind of like negative message, which somehow sort of feels like you're kind of giving up on your dreams, or it doesn't appeal to the ego of like the typical founder. But on the other hand, it's a very empowering message, because it sort of implies that no matter who you are and no matter what situation you're in, there is something very exciting and interesting to be found. And we need to really encourage that sense of discovery to replace that sense of, to replace that habit of copying that we have. And I don't know, I think we perhaps do try to do that, but I just don't think it comes very naturally, particularly now in obviously such a kind of media-driven world where we get all of our validation from, from external sources and from Instagram and whatever else it might be. It's super hard not to actually be sort of copying people more than ever, and I see that in my work, that you have really had a situation in recent years where companies are becoming more and more and more alike. They're becoming more alike in terms of their missions, their aesthetics, the part of the market that they're trying to operate. Homogeneity is increasing with the internet, is not decreasing. The internet does not promote diversity. It does the exact opposite. Music, businesses, all sorts of things back in the 90s were actually much, much more diverse. And so we're starting to cluster around these certain sort of ideals, which very, very few people are able to kind of profit at. And meanwhile, we are just leaving all sorts of other interesting angles unexplored. We're leaving fruit on the tree, I think, because of the way that our attentions are clustering into smaller and smaller places.
So just you keep coming to the word copying, and the counterpoint word that I think underlies what we should be doing is creating, right? And I think that's perhaps maybe where we go wrong, right? And trying to copy something as opposed to create something. And when we create, then we're maybe being more true to ourselves, or at least giving ourselves an opportunity to be more in tune with ourselves than trying to follow a template that somebody else has created.
Yeah, definitely.
There is, though, I think when you are starting out with something and building your skills, to have a mentor, to be able to follow someone's path in terms of how best to manage people, or how best to work out your pricing strategy or your marketing, those sorts of things. I don't think you need to reinvent the wheel and do your own version of. So I think there's a line between mentorship and following in the path of, and actually then creating your own unique offer. So I would imagine, for example, with Halo Ice Cream, that the guys would have spent some time looking at how do you run an ice cream business that you don't need to invent from scratch.
Completely. And again, I mean, if we take the Mother Teresa and Johnny Knoxville both brush their teeth the same way, I guess we're talking here only at what I would describe as the strategic level. And underpinning the strategic level are all sorts of non-strategic competencies that have a huge amount of repetition. They have a huge, they are masterable. We need to master them. We all need to learn to read or whatever, give or take. So yeah, I completely agree. And so it's important to only think about this at the absolute very highest, almost existential path level.
Because in that, just thinking about nature and nurture, and everybody has within them a gift or something special that's going to shine. And I'm thinking about my daughter who has ADHD and a school system that is not brilliant actually for children who are neurodiverse. So within her, there might be lots of positives, but in her environment, it's going to be very difficult to find a space. But actually following mentorship, support, following, copying is going to get you to a certain point and a platform that then might enable you to go and do something that's a unique expression of yourself.
Yeah, that's very interesting, and I guess that touches on, you know, the more kind of challenging side of this is that, you know, you can, I mean, I mentioned before, if I dropped you into a sort of Amazon tribe as a sort of extreme example, but on a more sort of boring day-to-day example, you know, you can obviously find yourself in the wrong place, or a place that is not really helpful for you, and maybe that can be quite difficult. And you know, we can see that in almost you know, you talk about, you know, a neurodiverse child in a normal school class. You know, there's no getting away from the fact that although there will be a couple of sort of edge cases where they kind of benefit from having that different experience, which the other kids don't have, in a lot of ways, needless to say, it goes without saying they're disadvantaged being in an environment that is not necessarily tailored for them. And we can all find ourselves in those situations. And I would say that, going back to that point I made earlier on about effort and struggle, and the fact that I'm somewhat dubious of like the way that we fetishize struggle. Again, accepting that there will be some big exceptions to this, I think we need to sort of be tuned in to whether or not we are struggling, whether or not we are, whether we feel like we're pushing things uphill and we aren't taking a sort of like a joyful process. This doesn't mean that things should come quick necessarily, but we should at least feel a sense of rhythm, a sense of flow in what we're doing. And if we aren't, I don't generally think that we should be beating ourselves up, or we should be thinking, oh, I'm just not trying hard enough, or any of those type of things. I think we need to recognize that maybe we are not in our right environment, as well as not necessarily following the path that's right for us, I guess.
And there absolutely is that fetishization, and certainly in U.S. business culture, you know, the person who you know, is admired and held up is that person who's putting in, you know, the long hours, and they're answering emails late at night, and they're, you know, doing things on the weekend, and you know, that somehow this is a paragon of, you know, a successful person, not recognizing the human cost in all of that, and perhaps, you know, all that work is causing relationship breakdowns, or, you know, a lack of family time, you know, may end up leading to depression because, you know, the relationships are failing, and to change that idea, right? That we, certainly in the US, there's a suspicion around things which are easy. It's almost like it's not to be trusted. Because somehow that's wrong, that it can only come through, you know, blood, sweat, you know, toil. You know, there's got to be this exorcism of effort, and then, you know, the success is worthy. If you get it too easily, it's almost devalued.
It's really interesting. I really like that point. I don't want to get too abstract here. I appreciate that I have been quite abstract in general, but it's worth noting, that being prime case in point, that you can obviously succeed through brute force and through effort, and you can succeed by doing the wrong thing, or by doing something that doesn't necessarily fit with you, or wherever it is. It is definitely true, I think, that if you try hard enough, you actually can make the breakthrough. But the problem with that is that if you do that, if you achieve that kind of success, what we might call a struggle-based success, it will always come at a cost. And it will come at a cost to, obviously, either you in an obvious way, or it might also come at a cost to the kind of environment that you're doing it in. So, you know, to take the most simple analogy of the square peg in the round hole, the truth is that you can put a square peg in a round hole if you push hard enough, right? It's just that you're just going
to corners off, but yes.
Yeah, exactly. You're just going to ravage the whole thing. And like, this is this is mega simplified example, but if we were to, let's say, take in business, when, let's say, a large corporate like Unilever or P&G release a product into the market, let's say a new beer or something, they will, because, and it's absolutely right, because the system works, they will obviously invest, let's say, $50-100 million behind that to make it succeed in a way that a founder with an independent founder is obviously not able to. Now, that marketing investment is a business equivalent of force. It's a business equivalent of effort. It's a business equivalent of essentially cramming something through, which if you let it go organically wouldn't necessarily fly. Now, the truth is that it clearly does work, but it comes at a cost. It comes at a cost to the parent company, an actual financial cost, which is fine. In the end, it all works out, but it is, they'd obviously rather spend nothing if they could. And it comes at a cost to the market, in other words, the sort of ecosystem, if you like, because it distorts what you see on shelf. What you see on shelf is not a kind of the winners of a sort of a pure market system. Like, it's not the beers that people like the best. It's a couple of beers that people like the best, and then a whole bunch of beers that are there through other kind of sort of crony-ish sort of forced mechanisms. So yeah, I just kind of like wanted to say that, because obviously I realize that it is wrong to say that that hard work doesn't bring success. It does. I just don't think it brings the optimal type of success.
Nice. I thought it might be good just to have a little nosy while we're on the topic of success at how people have described success in the chat. So Kylie said that the success is elusive. I think it's an inside game. May has described success as hard work and determination, and fostering the idea of failing is the first step to achieving your goal, which I like a lot. Jonathan has said, personally, I feel there's an art to giving myself the feeling of success, maybe regardless of the actual nature of the achievement, large or small. Thinking of some form of achievement as success, even if it has the uncomfortable grit and grain that stirs some new initiative. I think that's quite interesting. We had Terry on talking about imposter, the imposter phenomenon, not syndrome. And and it's very difficult for people who struggle with that imposter feelings to connect with that sense of success. So actually, if you are struggling with a sense of self and with that kind of imposter feeling, it would be very hard, I think, to lean into where the successes are and not want to force your hand in terms of where success is leading you and what you need to do to be successful.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely can't speak to, obviously, individual cases there, but connected to a couple of the other people's observations there as well. I do think that I haven't really thought about this before. I'm just thinking about this now, just off the back of what we've been what we've been saying. But I do like the idea that that you can find it with that idea of the sense of flow, which I'm sure we've all sort of read about and heard about, because it's obviously a trap to get into the situation where you are evaluating how successful you are based on how famous you are, or how much money you have, or some sort of like kind of end metric which you build to, and then you get past, and now I'm successful. Obviously, it's far more subtle than that. But in the absence of that, it does feel like that sense of kind of rhythm and belonging with what you're doing is a very good sort of heuristic for figuring out. It's a different way of evaluating success, one that isn't based on an end point in time, but rather one which is sort of constant and distributed over every moment, if that makes sense. So yeah, that's what those thoughts sort of made me think of.
Mish has talked about success as hard work and worth it. May's asked the question, how do you maintain motivation to succeed? And I think that's a really interesting question if you're staying in this space of relax, let the market shape where you go. So whereas I guess it's about wanting that effort and doing. What do I do if I want to be successful, if I'm then letting the market take me where it wants to take me?
Well, I think about if you want to become like a world-class pianist. I mean, I think we would all like to be a world-class pianist. If I could just click my fingers and you would become one. I certainly would. But you're only going to become one if, first of all, you want to become a crap pianist, right? If you would get real pleasure and real joy out of being really bad at the piano, then you can become good at the piano. But if you're a person who can't stand being bad at the piano, then I'm sorry, you'll never be good, because you obviously have to pass through those stages. You know, it's the same thing as if you want to have a newsletter with 1 million subscribers, the first thing that you have to enjoy is writing for nobody, right? If you really enjoy writing for nobody, if you're prepared to write 50 blog posts that nobody reads, but hey, I'm having a good time here, then you are, I guess, the sort of person who may end up with a newsletter with 1 million subscribers. So I think that it's, and I know that I've tried lots and lots of things in my life where I wanted the result, but I wasn't satisfied with the different stages before. And bearing in mind, you have no guarantee to get all the way. You know, you might become a crap pianist and you might stay there, but there are lots of people out there who are bad at piano and really like it anyway, you know? So I think that you have to really, in whatever the field is that you're doing, you have to kind of take some pleasure or satisfaction in being really bad at it, or being on a lower level. Just because, I mean, maybe I speak more for myself here, I just don't know how you're going to power through otherwise. I mean, you can power through, people do power through, maybe people with a lot more kind of determination than I have. But for the most part, going back to the Arnold Schwarzenegger analogy, you know, I'd much rather enjoy being in the gym than be hating every minute of it.
So I'm just thinking about, I don't know where the time's gone, and a way of kind of summarizing some of the key points for people who want to kind of take some of this thinking into building their own success. So I've heard you say that then that it's about recognizing all the space that's there rather than force it. I've heard you say enjoy the process, enjoy the practice. What other advice would you give to people listening who kind of want to kind of change, shift in gear in how they are moving towards business success?
Well, I think it probably would vary somewhat on depending on whether we're talking about business, whether we're talking about individual, or so on. If we're talking about a business, which is obviously sort of more my sweet spot, I think that one very useful thing to do is to quickly establish what norms there are, norms in your category, which you disagree with and which you can attack. I think it's very difficult to really find an interesting and productive path if you are in general agreement with everyone around you, and if you are hitting the same beats, obviously, as other businesses. You need to have a hypothesis which is fundamentally contrarian. Or everybody agrees that that X is very important in what we do, And you know what? I actually, not only do I think it's not important, I actually think it's positively harmful. Once you find something that you are prepared to let go, something which other people really value and think is important, that is when suddenly exciting things open up. You know, the classic case study of that is when Southwest Airlines were the first airline to say, you know what, actually, we don't give a damn about business travelers, the most profitable part of the market, we don't care. And then that, obviously, when they drop that thing, which everybody else was psychologically incapable of dropping, they suddenly come up with basically the whole category of low-cost airlines. And obviously the rest is history. And so, but you need to start with that fundamental disagreement. And you probably have one already, and maybe you suppress it or something, I don't know. But that I think is always a great place to begin searching. It's not actually about what you like, it's kind of about what you dislike that other people like, I sort of think is more important.
AJ Harper, who
challenging. I don't like to be contrary.
AJ Harper, who is a speech writing coach and writer herself. I'll clean up her quote, but you know, her advice is find something that really makes you mad.
Oh, I like that.
You know, and then talk about it, write about it, right? Because obviously, then you have a point of view. And I think, you know, that advice that you've got, Alex, is really great. Like, so what is it that makes you stand out, see things a little bit differently, right? And that then means potentially that you have something maybe more unique in the market, right? That then the market would be open to. And it seems like underlying some of what you're talking about, that, you know, Amanda and I in our world, we might use the word listening for all of that, right? To actually listen to the market, right? Be responsive to it, and then interpret what we're hearing back, and use that to be able to guide our way forward.
I mean, yeah, listening is absolutely the core. You're completely right.
So, Amanda, it looks like our time has flown by. It's been amazing. Alex, thank you so much for being here today. This was just an incredible discussion, and wish we had more time. And so maybe we're going to have you back and expand into this, right?
That would be a pleasure.
So thank you so much. Let's talk about what is going to be happening next week. So next week, we have a very interesting session with Fatemeh Beneshoib, talking about the authenticity challenge, about really talking about who you are, right? Bringing your whole self to work. Fatemeh is the artist and founder of Renew Business. It's a collective creative laboratory that guides visionary leaders and organizations to create work cultures like a piece of art. So art is going to be part of our conversation next week. So we really encourage you to attend. And again, thank you for being with us. Thank you, Alex, for being our guest, and everybody who was in our audience today for your questions, your comments. We look forward to seeing you next week, and of course, seeing you online. So reach out and connect with us, and we'll see you all soon.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.